The iron cuff bit into Mira's wrist, and the wagon lurched forward again, sending her crashing against the wooden slats behind her. She tasted blood where she'd bitten her tongue, but she didn't cry out. She'd learned not to cry out 3 days ago when the traffickers had dragged her from her apartment, chloroform-soaked rag pressed to her face, her last glimpse of freedom the streetlights of downtown Chicago blurring into darkness. Now she was somewhere else entirely, somewhere that shouldn't exist. The other women in the wagon with her huddled together, whimpering. Mira counted 12 of them total, all shackled to the central chain that ran the length of the enclosed cart. Through gaps in the wood, she caught glimpses of a landscape that made no sense. Twisted black trees under a perpetually gray sky, ruins of what looked like ancient temples rising from mist-covered hills, and in the distance, a city of impossible spires and towers that seemed to defy physics, all sharp angles and gleaming obsidian. "Where are we?" whispered the girl next to her, maybe 19, with tear-streaked makeup and a torn cocktail dress. She'd been taken from a club, she'd said. Kelly or Carrie, Mira couldn't remember. "I don't know," Mira whispered back, though she had a growing, terrible suspicion. The wagon jerked to a halt. Voices outside, low and cold, speaking in a language that sounded like wind through dead leaves. Then the doors were flung open, and Mira's breath caught. The man standing there wasn't human. He couldn't be. His skin was too pale, almost luminescent in the dim light, and his hair fell to his shoulders in waves of pure white. His eyes were the color of old blood, and when he smiled, revealing elongated canines, the woman next to Mira started screaming. "Quiet," he said in perfect English, his voice like silk over steel. "Or I'll give you something to scream about." The woman choked on her sobs, falling silent. The vampire, because that's what he was, Mira's mind finally accepted with a lurch of terror, gestured lazily, and other figures appeared behind him. More vampires, she realized. All pale, all beautiful, all utterly inhuman despite their human shapes. They were dragged from the wagon one by one. Mira's legs nearly gave out when her feet hit solid ground, but she forced herself upright. She wouldn't fall. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The marketplace sprawled before them, a nightmare of Gothic architecture and modern cruelty. Stalls sold everything from exotic weapons to glowing vials of what Mira realized with horror was blood. Vampires moved through the crowds, dressed in everything from medieval finery to sharp modern suits, and scattered among them, humans walked with collars around their necks, heads bowed. "Move!" the white-haired vampire snarled, yanking the chain. The line of captive women stumbled forward. They were herded to a raised platform in the center of the square. Mira's stomach turned as she understood. An auction block. They were being sold. The first woman was dragged up, weeping. The auctioneer, a vampire in an ornate coat that looked like it belonged in the 18th century, began calling out in that same harsh language. Numbers were shouted from the crowd. The woman was sold within minutes, dragged away by a vampire who looked at her the way someone might look at a particularly fine cut of meat. One by one, the women were sold. Mira watched, her mind racing, trying to find some way out, some escape. But there were vampires everywhere, and she was chained. And this place, wherever it was, clearly operated by different rules than the world she'd known. When her turn came, she walked up the steps herself, refusing to be dragged. Let them see she wasn't broken yet. The auctioneer grabbed her face, turning her head side to side. He said something in that guttural language, and laughter rippled through the crowd. Mira jerked her chin from his grip, earning a backhand that sent her sprawling. She tasted blood again, but pushed herself up to her knees, glaring at him. More laughter. The bidding started, the numbers climbed quickly. Mira didn't understand the currency, but she understood the hungry looks on the vampires' faces, the way they leaned forward to get a better look at her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Then the crowd fell silent. Mira looked up, following the collective gaze, and her breath stopped. A vampire was walking toward the platform, and he was nothing like the others. Where they were merely beautiful and terrifying, he was magnificent and overwhelming. He stood well over 6 feet, his frame powerful beneath a black coat that swept nearly to the ground. His hair was pure white, pulled back from a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw. His eyes were different too, not red like the others, but a deep crimson that seemed to hold centuries of knowledge and power. But it was the way the other vampires moved that told her what he was. They parted like water before him, bowing their heads, some even dropping to their knees as he passed. The auctioneer had gone completely still, his face pale even for a vampire. The newcomer stopped at the base of the platform, looking up at Mira with those ancient eyes. "Who holds the deed to this auction?" His voice was deep, cultured, with an accent Mira couldn't place. Old European, maybe, but older than that. Medieval. "My lord Nightraven," the auctioneer stammered, bowing so low his white hair nearly touched the ground. "The caravan master, Lord Draven, I'm purchasing the entire caravan," the vampire said calmly. "Every human in this lot. Name your price." Shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "My lord, that's the value would be Lord Draven would need to authorize. Then fetch him." It wasn't a suggestion. The auctioneer practically fled from the platform. Mira stayed on her knees, not trusting her legs, staring at this Nightraven. He hadn't looked away from her once. Within minutes, another vampire appeared, this one dressed in modern clothes, a sleek black suit that probably cost more than Mira's monthly rent back in Chicago. He approached Nightraven with careful deference. "Your Majesty," he said, and Mira's stomach dropped. Majesty. King. Oh God. "I'm honored by your interest, but surely state your price for the caravan." "Your Majesty, if I might inquire as to your interest in these particular..." Nightraven moved so fast Mira didn't see it. One moment he was standing still, the next his hand was around the other vampire's throat, lifting him off the ground. Lord Draven clawed at the grip, his face twisting in fear. "I don't repeat myself," Nightraven said softly. "Price. Now." A number was gasped out. Nightraven dropped the vampire, who stumbled back, bowing repeatedly. From somewhere in his coat, Nightraven produced a small crystalline card that shimmered with an inner light. He handed it to Draven, who took it with shaking hands. "The funds are transferred. Release them. All of them." Keys were produced. The auctioneer rushed back onto the platform, unlocking Mira's shackles first with fumbling hands. The iron fell away, and she rubbed her raw wrists, not understanding what was happening, but knowing it was different than what she'd feared. The other women were freed from their chains as well, clustering together in terrified confusion. Nightraven surveyed them all, then his gaze returned to Mira. "You," he said. "What's your name?" She should probably be more frightened, but something in his tone wasn't threatening. It was almost careful. "Mira," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Mira Eastwick." "Mira Eastwick," he repeated, as if testing the shape of her name. "You're all free to go. Draven will provide transportation back to the human world, whatever city you were taken from. You'll be returned tonight, with compensation for your trauma and enough money to start fresh if you choose." Stunned silence. Then one of the women burst into tears, and another started thanking him in a flood of breathless words. Nightraven held up one hand. "Thank Lord Draven's greed for making this transaction simple." His tone made it clear that Draven was anything but thanked. "Go. You're under my protection now until you're safely home. No vampire in this realm will touch you." They were hustled away by servants who had appeared from somewhere, vampires in plain clothes who moved with careful gentleness. Mira started to follow, but Nightraven's voice stopped her. "Not you. I need to speak with you." The other women looked back at her with wide eyes, but they were pulled along by the tide of their own relief and fear. Within moments, Mira stood alone on the platform with the vampire king watching her. She lifted her chin. "Why?" A flicker of something crossed his face. Amusement, maybe. "Come with me, please." The please surprised her enough that she descended the platform steps. He waited until she stood in front of him, then gestured toward a path through the marketplace. She walked beside him, aware of every eye on them, every vampire who stared and whispered. They passed through the market into a broader street, cobblestones giving way to smooth black stone that reflected the gray sky like dark glass. Buildings rose around them, impossible architecture that mixed medieval castles with modern glass and steel. Vampires bowed as Nightraven passed, none daring to meet his eyes. "Where are we going?" Mira finally asked. "My residence. I have a house in the city." "Your residence?" She let out a sharp laugh. "Right, because that's not terrifying at all." He glanced at her. "You're frightened." "Of course I'm frightened. You're a vampire king, apparently. I just watched you buy me and 11 other women like we were cattle. I bought you to free you." "Why?" They turned down another street, narrower, lined with tall iron gates. Nightraven stopped in front of one, pressing his palm to the dark metal. It swung open silently, revealing a courtyard garden of white flowers and black stone paths. "Because," he said quietly, "I've been looking for you for 300 years." Mira's mind went blank. She stared at him, waiting for the punchline, the trick. "What?" "Come inside. Let me explain." "You're safe, Mira Eastwick. I swear it on my blood and my crown. No harm will come to you in my home." She should run, should scream, should do anything except follow a vampire king into his house. But something in his eyes stopped her, something that looked almost like longing, and she found herself stepping through the gate. The house beyond was beautiful in a stark, elegant way. High ceilings, pale walls, furniture that mixed modern comfort with antique luxury. Nightraven led her through a sitting room to a library, floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with books in languages Mira couldn't identify. He gestured to a chair near a cold fireplace. "Sit, please. Would you like anything? Food? Water?" "Answers," Mira said, but she sat. Her legs were shaking. Nightraven paced to the window, looking out at the garden. In the strange gray light, he looked like a figure from a painting, all sharp edges and graceful menace. "How much do you know about vampires?" "Apparently nothing, since I thought you were myths until 3 days ago. We're very real, and we're careful. We've lived alongside humanity for millennia, hidden in the shadows. Most vampires live in the human world, blending in. This realm, the Shadowlands we call it, is our origin place, connected to Earth but separate. A pocket dimension, if you prefer modern terms." Mira wrapped her arms around herself. "Okay, great. Vampire dimension. Why was I kidnapped and brought here?" His jaw tightened. "Human trafficking is illegal by our laws, but there are always those who defy the codes. Vampires who see humans as nothing but food or slaves. I've been hunting these cartels for decades, but they're clever. They snatch victims from cities where they won't be missed, bring them here, sell them to the highest bidder." "And you just happened to be there today?" "No. I've had watchers monitoring the major auction houses. When word came that Draven was selling a new lot, I came immediately." He turned from the window, meeting her eyes. "I've been searching for a very long time, Mira, for a human woman with a very specific mark." Ice ran down her spine. "What mark?" "A birthmark, on the left shoulder blade, shaped like a crescent moon." Mira's hand went automatically to her left shoulder. She'd always had that mark, a faint silver-white line curved like a new moon. Her mother had called it an angel's kiss when she was little. "How do you know about my birthmark?" she whispered. Nightraven crossed the room, kneeling in front of her chair so they were at eye level. Up close, he was even more devastating, and those crimson eyes held such intensity she couldn't look away. 300 years ago, he said quietly, I was betrothed to a human woman. Her name was Mira. She was a scholar's daughter in a village in what's now Germany, brilliant and brave and utterly fearless. She knew what I was, and she didn't care. We were going to be married to bond our lives together in the old way. But the night before the ceremony, a rival vampire lord attacked. He killed her entire family, burned the village to ash. Mira's throat was tight. I'm sorry, but I don't see what that has to do with. She had the same mark you do, the crescent moon. And before she died, a witch who was her friend cast a spell, a reincarnation spell. Morel's soul would be reborn again and again until we found each other again. His voice was raw now, centuries of grief bleeding through. I've been searching every lifetime. I've found her twice before. Once in 1802 in London. I reached her the day before she died of consumption. Once in 1954 in Paris. I found her 3 days after she was killed in a car accident. Mira's hands were shaking. You think I'm her, reincarnated. I know you are. The moment I saw you on that platform, I knew. You have her eyes, her spirit, the way you stood up after being struck, the way you glared at that auctioneer that was pure morel. She stood abruptly, needing distance. This is insane. Reincarnation isn't real. Magic isn't real. None of this is real. You're in a vampire dimension after being sold in a slave auction, Nightraven said, standing as well. What part of your reality is still intact? Fair point. Mira pressed her hands to her face, trying to think. Okay, let's say I believe you. Let's say I am this Morel reborn. What does that mean? What do you want from me? Nothing you don't want to give, he said, and his voice was so gentle it made her chest ache. I freed you. I'll protect you. I'll send you home tonight if that's what you want, with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You'll never see me again. But I'm asking you to stay. For a little while. Let me show you this world. Let me prove to you who you are, who we were. If after that you still want to leave, I'll take you home myself and never bother you again. Mira looked at him, this impossible creature who claimed to have loved her in past lives. He could be lying, could be manipulating her. But the pain in his eyes looked real, and he had freed her when he could have just bought her outright. If I stay, she said slowly, I need promises. Real ones. Anything. I'm not a prisoner. I can leave whenever I want. You won't feed from me without permission. You won't hurt me, and you'll tell me the truth about everything. You have my word. On my blood, my crown, and Morel's memory. She should say no, should demand to go home right now. But something in her chest was pulling her forward. Something that felt like recognition, like coming home after a long journey. 1 week, she said. I'll give you 1 week. The relief that flooded his face was so profound it took her breath away. Thank you, he whispered. The guest room he showed her to was larger than her entire apartment in Chicago. A massive 4-poster bed dominated the space, draped in deep blue silk. Windows overlooked the garden, and through them she could see the strange twilight sky of the Shadowlands, neither day nor night. Nightraven paused at the door. There are clothes in the wardrobe. Everything should fit. Food will be brought up shortly, human food. If you need anything, just speak my name aloud. I'll hear you. That's not creepy at all, Mira muttered, but without much heat. He almost smiled. Almost. Rest. We'll talk more tomorrow. After he left, Mira sank onto the bed, her mind spinning. She should be hysterical, should be plotting escape. Instead, she felt a strange calm settling over her, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. She touched her shoulder, feeling the raised line of her birthmark through her shirt. 300 years, 3 lifetimes. What were the odds? Sleep claimed her despite everything, exhaustion winning over fear. She dreamed of a village with thatched roofs and dirt roads, of a man with white hair and crimson eyes who smiled at her with such love it made her chest ache. She dreamed of running through moonlit fields, laughing, his hand in hers. She dreamed of fire and screaming and reaching for him across an impossible distance as darkness pulled her down. She woke gasping, tears on her cheeks. The room was dark now, lit only by moonlight through the windows. And in the chair by the door, she could make out a pale figure sitting perfectly still, watching over her. You stayed, she said, her voice thick. You were dreaming, Nightraven said quietly, crying out. I wanted to make sure you were all right. She wiped her face. I dreamed about fire, about dying. His silence was answer enough. It was real, wasn't it? The memories, they're real. The spell that bound your soul to reincarnate also ensured you would remember eventually. Usually it takes time, but the shock of being here, of meeting me, it's accelerated the process. Mira sat up, pulling her knees to her chest. This is really happening. Yes. What was her name? My name. In that first life. Mirel Eisenbach. You were 23. You loved books and stargazing. You weren't afraid of anything. His voice was thick with memory. You used to say that death was just another adventure, and you'd rather have one real year than 1,000 empty ones. And you loved her. I love you, he corrected softly. In every life, it's always you. Something in her chest cracked open, and Mira felt tears spilling over again. Not from fear this time, but from a grief and recognition that went bone deep. She had loved him. Part of her still did, the part that remembered dancing in moonlight and stolen kisses in the dark. I can't promise I'm her, she whispered. I'm Mira. I grew up in Chicago. I work as a paralegal. I have a life there, friends, responsibilities. I don't know how to be some reincarnated soul. Nightraven stood, moving to the window so his back was to her. I don't need you to be anyone but yourself, Mira. That's who she is in every life, your soul, your essence. I'm not asking you to remember or to be someone you're not. I'm only asking you to give me time to know you, to let me show you the truth. And then what? Even if I believe you, even if I remember everything, what kind of future could we have? You're immortal. I'm human. You're a vampire king with a whole realm to rule. I'm nobody. He turned, and the look on his face made her breath catch. You're everything, and there are ways, bonds that can extend your life, transformations, if you choose them. But those are decisions for the future. Right now, I just want you safe and here. She should argue, should point out all the logical flaws in this impossible situation, but she was tired and confused, and some part of her that felt ancient and knowing was whispering that he was telling the truth. Okay, she said finally. 1 week. Show me. Over the next several days, Nightraven became her guide to a world she'd never imagined existed. The Shadowlands, she learned, were vast, a realm of twilight cities and midnight forests that existed parallel to Earth. Vampires could travel between worlds through portals hidden in shadows, living double lives. Most maintained residences in both realms, hunting in the human world but returning here for safety and governance. Nightraven's full name, he told her, was Nikolai Aravis, and he had ruled the vampire realm for over 800 years. He showed her his palace in the heart of the Shadowlands capital, a sprawling Gothic fortress of black stone and silver spires that took her breath away. Showed her the council chambers where he met with the noble houses, the libraries full of histories written in blood and gold, the gardens where white roses bloomed under the eternal gray sky. He introduced her to other vampires, always making clear she was under his protection. A few tried to challenge him subtly, questioning why a human walked freely in their realm, but one look from Nikolai silenced them. They fear you, Mira said one evening as they walked through the palace gardens. She'd been given clothes that fit this strange world, elegant dresses of dark velvet and silk that made her feel like she'd stepped into a period drama. Nikolai wore his usual black, a long coat over a crisp shirt, looking every inch the dangerous king he was. They respect power, he corrected. I've ruled longer than most of them have been alive. I've put down rebellions and ended wars. They know better than to cross me. It must be lonely, Mira said, being that powerful, that feared. He glanced at her. It was, for a very long time. Something in his tone made her chest ache. They'd been dancing around each other all week, Nikolai showing her his world while maintaining a careful distance. He never pushed, never demanded. But she felt his attention on her constantly, the weight of centuries of longing in every glance. The memories were coming faster now, flashes of that first life, of being Mirel. She remembered the thrill of meeting Nikolai, the vampire who'd come to her father seeking books on ancient languages. Remembered the slow, burning realization that he was dangerous and beautiful and entirely inhuman. Remembered not caring, because when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she never had before. She also remembered the night he'd proposed, the old-fashioned way, kneeling in her father's study with a ring of silver and moonstone. Remembered planning their bonding ceremony, the vampire ritual that would tie their lives together. Remembered her best friend, the hedge witch Elise, promising to stand with her. And she remembered the attack, the fire, the screaming. Nikolai fighting desperately to reach her, cutting through enemies like a force of nature, but not fast enough. Remembered Elise grabbing her hand as the flames closed in, whispering words of power, promising that death wouldn't be the end. Remembered dying in smoke and pain, reaching for Nikolai one last time. She came back to herself sitting on a bench in the garden, Nikolai kneeling in front of her, his hands carefully not touching hers, though she could see he wanted to reach for her. "You remembered," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I remember dying," she whispered. "I remember how much it hurt. Not the fire. Leaving you. That was what hurt." His jaw clenched. "You don't have to remember. I shouldn't have brought you here. Force this on you." "Stop." She reached out, touching his face. He froze, his eyes closing like her touch caused him pain. Or relief. "You didn't force anything. And I need to know. I need to understand what this is." When he opened his eyes again, they were bright with unshed tears. Vampires could cry, she realized, could feel everything humans did, just amplified by centuries of existence. "In London," he said hoarsely, "when I found you in 1802, you were dying in a charity hospital. I only had an hour with you. You didn't remember who I was, but you knew somehow. You told me you dreamed of me your whole life. You made me promise to keep looking, to find you in the next life, and then you were gone. And in Paris? You were a nurse. You'd been hit by a car on your way to work. I found your body in the morgue." His voice broke. "I was 3 days too late. I held you and I swore I would find you faster next time, that I wouldn't fail again." Mira's vision blurred with tears. All that grief carried across centuries. All that love, never given up despite impossible odds. "You didn't fail, Nikolai. You found me. I'm here." "You're here," he repeated, but he sounded like he didn't quite believe it. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. He made a sound like a wounded animal, his hands finally coming up to cradle her face with infinite gentleness. "I'm here," she said again, "and I'm not dying. Not today." They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing each other in. When Mira finally pulled back, Nikolai was looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Tell me about the bond," she said, "the ritual you were going to do, before." He hesitated. "It's old magic, older than vampires, older than this realm. It ties two souls together, makes them aware of each other always, gives the human partner extended life, not immortality but centuries, makes them stronger, harder to kill. It's irreversible once completed. And you wanted to do that with Morel. I wanted her to have a choice, to live as long as she wished, not be limited by a human lifespan, to be my equal in every way that mattered." Mira thought about that, about living for centuries with Nikolai, learning this strange world, having time to truly know him. The idea should terrify her, but instead it felt right, like a puzzle piece sliding into place. "I need to think," she said. "This is a lot." "Of course. Take all the time you need." But time, as it turned out, wasn't something they had. 2 days later, Mira was in the palace library, reading a history of the vampire realm, when shouting erupted from somewhere below. She stood, alarmed, just as Nikolai appeared in the doorway. His face was set in harsh lines, and his eyes had gone from crimson to black. "Come with me, now!" She didn't argue, following him through corridors at a near run. Vampire guards flanked them, their own eyes dark with battle readiness. They descended into what looked like a throne room, vast and echoing, where a crowd of vampires had gathered. At the center stood a vampire who made Mira's skin crawl. He was tall like Nikolai, but where Nikolai radiated controlled power, this one felt like barely contained violence. His white hair was wild, his eyes a poisonous gold, and when he smiled, showing fangs, it was the expression of a predator. "Your Majesty," the vampire purred, his voice mocking. "How kind of you to join us, and you brought your little human pet. Perfect. Caius." Nikolai said, and his voice could have frozen blood. You dare enter my palace? I dare many things. Or have you forgotten? Caius gestured lazily, and Mira realized there were other vampires with him, a dozen at least, all armed with wicked-looking blades that seemed to drink in the light. Nikolai moved subtly, putting himself between Mira and the threat. State your business and leave. You're not welcome here. My business is the throne. I challenge you, Nikolai Aravis, for the crown of the Shadowlands. You've ruled too long, grown too weak. Time for new blood. Murmurs rippled through the watching vampires. Nikolai's expression didn't change, but Mira felt the temperature in the room drop. You want a challenge? Fine. Name your terms. Traditional rules. Combat to submission or death. Tonight at moonrise. Witness by the full council. Caius's golden eyes slid to Mira. And when I win, I'll take your human as part of the spoils. She'll look lovely in chains in my court. Mira felt ice run through her veins, but Nikolai's response was instant and deadly. He moved faster than thought, suddenly in front of Caius, one hand wrapped around the challenger's throat. You will never touch her, Nikolai said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying to every corner of the room. Challenge me for the throne if you wish, Caius. But speak of her again and I'll end you where you stand. Politics be damned. Caius managed a choked laugh. Accepted. See you at moonrise, your majesty. Nikolai released him, and Caius vanished in a blur of speed, his followers melting away. The throne room erupted in conversation, vampires arguing and speculating. Nikolai grabbed Mira's hand, pulling her from the room. They ended up in his private chambers, a suite of rooms done in dark wood and darker colors. Nikolai paced like a caged wolf, his control fraying. What just happened? Mira demanded. Caius is an old enemy. We fought for the throne 800 years ago when the previous king died. I won then, barely. He's been waiting for a chance to challenge me again. Can you beat him? Nikolai stopped pacing, looking at her. I don't know. He's powerful and he's had centuries to prepare. If I lose, then don't lose. She crossed to him, gripping his arms. You're the vampire king, Nikolai. You've survived 800 years of challenges and wars. You can survive this. If I lose, he'll take you. I've seen what Caius does to humans he owns. I can't... His voice broke. I can't lose you again, Mira. Not when I just found you. She reached up, pulling his face down to hers. Then fight. Win. Come back to me. He kissed her then, finally, and it was like coming home and catching fire all at once. His lips were cool, but the passion behind them was anything but. 300 years of longing poured into one desperate moment. Mira kissed him back with everything she had, her hands tangling in his white hair, holding him close. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Nikolai rested his forehead against hers. If I win, he said hoarsely, I'm asking you to bond with me, to stay here, with me, for as long as you want. I'm not losing you to time again. If you win, Mira said, I'll say yes. The Moonrise Challenge took place in an ancient arena beneath the palace, a circular chamber carved from black stone with a floor of white sand. The Vampire Council sat in raised seats around the perimeter, 13 ancient vampires who looked like death-given form. The crowd was massive. Hundreds of vampires come to watch their king fight for his crown. Mira sat in a special box, guarded by Nikolai's most trusted warriors. He'd wanted to send her away, somewhere safe, but she'd refused. If he was fighting for her, she was going to watch. The combat was brutal. Nikolai and Caius met in the center of the arena, circling each other with predatory grace. When they collided, it was with inhuman speed and strength, blows that would have shattered stone. Blood splattered the white sand, black in the torchlight. Caius fought dirty, using every trick and tactic. He was faster than Nikolai, younger by a few centuries, and it showed. But Nikolai fought with the precision of 800 years of experience. Every move calculated, every strike designed to incapacitate. They were evenly matched, and the fight dragged on for what felt like hours. Mira's hands were clenched so tight her nails drew blood. She watched Nikolai take a blade to the shoulder and barely flinch, watched him break Caius's arm with a brutal twist, watched them separate and come together again in a whirlwind of violence. Finally, Nikolai got the upper hand. He disarmed Caius, sending his blade skittering across the sand, and drove him to his knees. The chamber fell silent. "Yield," Nikolai commanded, his voice echoing. Caius looked up at him with hatred in his golden eyes. "Never!" "Then die!" Nikolai moved to strike the killing blow, but Caius was faster. He grabbed something from his belt, a vial that glowed with sickly green light, and hurled it at Nikolai's face. The glass shattered, and Nikolai staggered back, clawing at his eyes, a scream tearing from his throat. Poison. Vampire poison, Mira realized with horror. Caius had cheated. The crowd erupted in outrage, but Caius was already moving. He grabbed Nikolai's fallen blade and raised it for a killing strike. Time seemed to slow. Mira saw it happening, saw Nikolai blinded and helpless, saw the blade descending. She moved without thinking, vaulting over the railing of the box and sprinting across the arena floor. Her guard shouted after her, but she didn't stop, didn't think, just ran. She reached Nikolai and threw herself in front of him, raising her arms as if she could somehow block a vampire's strike. The blade stopped an inch from her throat. Caius stared at her, shocked. Around them, the crowd had gone completely silent. "You would die for him?" Caius said, disbelief clear in his voice. "Yes," Mira said simply. Caius looked at her, then at Nikolai, who was trying to reach for her despite his blindness. Something shifted in the challenger's face. Disgust, maybe, or respect. He lowered the blade. "I forfeit," he said loudly, and gasps echoed through the chamber. "The human shows more honor than I. The throne remains Nikolai's." He dropped the blade and vanished in a blur of speed, his shame echoing behind him. The crowd erupted, some shouting approval, others confusion. Mira didn't care. She turned to Nikolai, helping him sink to the ground. "I'm here," she said, taking his face in her hands. "I'm right here. Mira, you shouldn't have. That was insane." "Yeah, well, apparently I'm an idiot in every lifetime." She was crying now, trembling with reaction. "Are you okay? Your eyes? They'll heal. Vampire constitution." He reached up blindly, finding her face. "You saved me." "Of course I did. I love you, you dramatic vampire king." The words escaped before she could think about them, but she didn't take them back, because they were true. Somewhere between the terror and the memories, and the impossible romance of it all, she'd fallen completely in love with Nikolai Aravis. He made a sound between a laugh and a sob, pulling her against his chest. Around them, the vampires were beginning to leave. The show over, but Mira didn't care about them. She held Nikolai while his eyes slowly healed from the poison, whispering reassurances, promising she wasn't going anywhere. By the time his vision returned, they were alone in the arena except for his guard standing at a respectful distance. "You meant it," he said, looking at her with those crimson eyes that could see right through her. "You love me." "I do. I think I've loved you for 300 years, actually. Just took me a while to remember." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, like she was something precious beyond measure. "Marry me, bond with me, stay with me." "Yes," she said, laughing through tears. "Yes to all of it." The bonding ceremony took place a week later in the palace gardens under a full moon. The Vampire Council presided, though their faces showed clear discomfort at the old ritual being performed. Nikolai had explained that bonding ceremonies had fallen out of favor centuries ago, considered too binding, too permanent. Most modern vampires preferred looser arrangements with their human companions. But Nikolai was anything but modern in his approach to love. He stood before her in ceremonial robes of black and silver, his white hair braided with threads of moonlight silk, looking like something out of a dream. Mira wore a gown of deep midnight blue, simple and elegant, with her hair loose around her shoulders. The ritual required them to exchange blood and vows, binding their life forces together. Nikolai's oldest advisor, a vampire woman named Seraphine, with hair like starlight, presided over the ceremony. She spoke the old words in that harsh vampire language, then translated for Mira's benefit. Nikolai Aravis, King of Shadows, do you offer your blood, your life, your soul to this human woman? I do, Nikolai said, his voice steady. As I offered it 300 years ago, and would offer it 300 years hence. I am hers in this life and all others. Seraphine turned to Mira. Mira Eastwick, daughter of Earth, do you accept this bond? Do you offer your blood, your life, your soul to this vampire king? Mira looked at Nikolai, at the hope and love naked on his face, and felt the truth of it resonate in her chest. This was right. This was always meant to be. I do, she said clearly. In this life and all others. Seraphine produced a ceremonial blade, silver-edged with something that shimmered like captured starlight. She made a small cut on Nikolai's palm, then on Mira's. They pressed their hands together, blood mingling, and Mira gasped as power surged through her. It felt like lightning and honey, burning and sweet at once. She could feel Nikolai suddenly, not just physically, but in her mind, her soul. Could sense his presence like a second heartbeat, steady and strong. His relief and joy flooded through the connection, so intense it made her dizzy. The bond is sealed, Seraphine intoned. 2 souls, 1 thread, may it never break. Nikolai pulled Mira into his arms, kissing her deeply while the gathered vampires applauded politely. When they broke apart, Mira felt different. Stronger, more aware. The world seemed sharper, colors brighter, sounds clearer. How do you feel? Nikolai murmured against her hair. Like I could run a marathon, or fight a vampire. Is this normal? He laughed, the sound rich with happiness. Very normal. The bond enhances human abilities. You'll be faster, stronger, harder to injure, and you'll live for centuries now, as long as I do. Centuries, she repeated, testing the word. To be with you. If you'll have me that long. She pulled back to look at him. Nikolai, I've loved you for 3 lifetimes. I think I can manage a few more centuries. The celebration that followed went late into the night. Vampires from every noble house came to pay their respects, to acknowledge their king's bonded mate. Mira was introduced to what felt like hundreds of vampires, all of them eyeing her with curiosity and varying degrees of respect. She was under Nikolai's protection before, now she was his equal in status, and they had to treat her accordingly. Around midnight, Nikolai pulled her away from the crowd, leading her through quiet corridors to his private chambers. Their chambers now, she realized. She was his queen in all but official title. The rooms had been prepared with care. Candles burned everywhere, casting warm light. White roses filled vases on every surface, their scent intoxicating. And through the open windows, the eternal twilight of the Shadowlands seemed softer somehow, almost welcoming. Nikolai turned to her, suddenly uncertain. Are you all right? With all of this? I know it's overwhelming. She silenced him with a kiss, pouring everything she felt through the bond between them. Love and certainty, and the bone-deep knowledge that this was where she belonged. When she pulled back, Nikolai was looking at her with such reverence it made her heart ache. I spent 300 years looking for you, he said softly. 300 years of grief and loneliness and fear that I'd never find you in time again. And now you're here. You're mine. And I don't know how I survived all those years without you. You don't have to anymore, Mira said, taking his hands. I'm here. We're together. That's all that matters. They spent that night learning each other again, not with urgency, but with reverence, taking their time. Nikolai was gentle and patient, aware of her mortality despite the bond, treating her like something infinitely precious. And through it all, Mira felt the echo of that first life, of Morel and Nikolai learning each other in stolen moments before the world tore them apart. But they weren't being torn apart this time. This time, they had won. In the weeks that followed, Mira settled into her new life with surprising ease. Nikolai had to handle the political fallout from the challenge. Caius had disappeared, fled to some distant corner of the realm, but his allies remained and required careful management. Mira learned to navigate vampire court politics, which turned out to be not that different from the office politics of her old paralegal job, just with more fangs and formal gowns. She also began training in combat at Nikolai's insistence. If she was going to live in the vampire realm, she needed to be able to defend herself. Nikolai assigned her a trainer, a vampire warrior named Theron, who was patient and skilled and didn't pull his punches. Within a month, Mira could hold her own in a fight. The bond enhanced strength and speed, making her far more capable than any normal human. But it was the quiet moments she treasured most. Evenings spent in the library with Nikolai, reading or talking for hours. Mornings in the garden, walking among the white roses. Nights in their chambers, holding each other and marveling at the impossible miracle of having found each other again. 3 months after the bonding, Mira woke from a dream with tears on her face. Nikolai was immediately alert beside her, pulling her close. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "No, I remembered something." She turned to look at him in the dim light. "From the first life, from before." "What did you remember?" "Everything." Her voice broke. "I remember all of it now. Our first meeting. The first time you kissed me. Planning the bonding ceremony. Elise casting the spell as I died, promising me I'd find you again." She touched his face. "You've been waiting so long, Nikolai. I'm so sorry you had to wait." "Don't," he said fiercely. "Don't apologize. You're here. That's all that matters." "I loved you then," she whispered, "and I love you now. It's the same love, just grown stronger." He kissed her, tasting the salt of her tears. "I know. I've always known." They held each other as the memory settled into place, the final piece of the puzzle clicking home. Mira was Morel, and she was Mira, and she was all the lives in between. All of it was her, and all of it had led her here, to this moment, to this man who had loved her across centuries. A year into their bonding, Nikolai took Mira back to the human world for the first time since her kidnapping. She'd worried about going back, about seeing Chicago again, and being reminded of her old life. But Nikolai had a surprise planned. He took her to Germany, to the village where Morel had lived. Most of it was gone, built over by modern development, but the site of her father's house remained, marked by a small memorial stone Nikolai had placed centuries ago. They stood there in the evening light, Mira reading the inscription, "Mirel Eisenbach, beloved daughter and scholar, her spirit lives eternal." "I come here sometimes," Nikolai said quietly, "when the centuries feel too long, to remember what I'm searching for." Mira took his hand, squeezing tight. "You don't have to search anymore. No, now I get to live." They traveled through Europe for a month, visiting places from Nikolai's long life, places he wanted to share with her. Paris, where he'd found her second reincarnation. London, where they'd had that hour together before death claimed her again. Venice, where he'd spent decades in exile after a political coup. Prague, where he'd learned to paint during the Renaissance. Everywhere they went, Nikolai showed her the world through vampire eyes, the hidden societies and secret histories that existed beneath human awareness. Mira saw vampire courts hidden in ancient mansions, libraries full of books that predated printing presses, art collections worth billions that only immortals ever saw. But she also saw Nikolai's loneliness in all those places, the echoes of centuries spent alone. And she understood, finally, what it meant that he'd never stopped looking for her. He could have moved on, could have found someone else, could have let himself forget. But he'd held on to love across 300 years of searching, refusing to give up. "Thank you," she said one night in a hotel in Vienna, the two of them curled together on a balcony watching the city lights. "For what?" "For not giving up. For finding me." He kissed her temple. "I would search for 3,000 years if that's what it took. I will always find you, Mira. In every life, every world. You're my constant." They returned to the Shadowlands after that trip, and Mira realized with surprise that it felt like coming home. The palace, the realm, even the eternal twilight sky, it was all familiar now, comfortable. She'd made friends among the vampire court, allies who respected her not just as Nikolai's bonded mate, but as her own person. She also began working with the Human Advocacy Council, a group dedicated to protecting humans in the vampire realm and shutting down trafficking operations. It turned out her paralegal background was incredibly useful in navigating vampire law, and she threw herself into the work with passion. Nikolai supported her completely, using his authority as king to push through reforms that had been blocked for centuries. 2 years after their bonding, they celebrated with a formal coronation ceremony. Nikolai insisted on it, wanting the realm to officially recognize Mira as his queen. She wore a crown of silver and moonstone, matching Nikolai's crown of black diamond and platinum, and accepted the oaths of the noble houses. "Queen Mira of the Shadowlands," Seraphine announced, and the gathered vampires bowed. Mira looked out at the sea of pale faces and white hair, at these immortal creatures acknowledging her authority, and felt a surge of pride. She'd come so far from that terrified woman on the auction block. She'd found herself, found her past, found her future, and she'd found love that transcended death itself. 5 years into their bonding, Nikolai surprised her again. They were in their private garden, the white roses in full bloom, when he knelt before her with a small box in his hands. "What are you doing?" Mira asked, laughing. "We're already bonded." "Bonded, yes, but not married, not in the human way." He opened the box, revealing a ring of silver with a moonstone center, delicate and beautiful. "Morel never got to wear this. I had it made for our wedding 300 years ago. I've carried it through every life since, hoping I'd get the chance to give it to you properly." Tears sprang to Mira's eyes. "Nikolai, marry me, Mira Eastwick. Let me be your husband in every way that matters, in every tradition that exists. Let me give you the wedding we were denied 3 centuries ago." "Yes," she said, pulling him up to kiss him. "Yes, absolutely yes." The wedding took place in the same garden where they'd bonded, but this time it was a human ceremony, as well as a vampire one. Nikolai had tracked down a priest who knew about the vampire world, a kind-faced man who agreed to perform the service. Mira wore a simple white dress, and Nikolai wore a suit instead of ceremonial robes, and they exchanged vows that were theirs and theirs alone. "I promise to love you in this life and all others," Nikolai said, sliding the ring onto her finger. "To find you in every lifetime. To wait for you across eternity if I must. You're my heart, Mira. You always have been. I promise to remember you," Mira said, her voice thick with emotion. "To know you in every life, to choose you again and again. You're my soul, Nikolai, in every form, every lifetime." They kissed as husband and wife, queen and king, bonded souls finally united after 300 years of searching. The celebration lasted 3 days, vampires and humans alike gathering to honor the union. Mira's Human Advocacy Council friends came, as did nobles from every corner of the realm. Even some vampires who'd been skeptical of a human queen came to pay their respects, won over by Mira's work and dedication. On the 3rd night, as the celebration finally wound down, Nikolai pulled Mira away to the palace rooftop. They stood beneath the stars, real stars, visible here in the Shadowlands in a way they never were in the human world, and he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. "Incredibly. You? More than I have words for. I have you, Mira. After 300 years of searching, after 3 lifetimes of grief, I have you, and I get to keep you for centuries more." She turned in his arms to face him. "What do you think she would say, Mirel, if she could see us now?" Nikolai smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. "I think she'd say it was about damn time. She was never very patient." Mira laughed. "Neither am I, apparently. I did tackle a vampire warlord to save you." "You did, my fierce, brave queen." They stayed there for hours, talking and holding each other and marveling at the sheer impossible luck of having found each other again. The Shadowlands sky was beginning to lighten as much as it ever did when they finally headed back inside. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. Mira continued her advocacy work, becoming a powerful voice for human rights in the vampire realm. She helped shut down 3 more trafficking operations, personally overseeing the rescue and return of over 100 humans. Her name became known and respected, not just as Nikolai's queen but as a force in her own right. Nikolai ruled with Mira at his side, their bond making them stronger together than either could be alone. She could sense his moods through their connection, could offer support or advice before he even had to ask, and he could feel her emotions, her needs, responding to them with a care and attention that never wavered. They traveled between worlds regularly, maintaining a presence in both realms. Mira kept ties to the human world, visiting friends and family when she could. She'd told them she'd married a wealthy European and moved abroad, which wasn't entirely a lie. Her sister had been suspicious at first, but eventually accepted it, happy that Mira seemed so genuinely in love. 10 years after their bonding, on the anniversary of that day in the garden, Nikolai took Mira back to the arena where they'd fought Caius. It had been transformed, turned into a memorial garden for humans who'd been victimized by vampire trafficking. White roses bloomed everywhere, and at the center stood a statue of a human woman breaking free from chains. "I wanted you to see this," Nikolai said. "The council approved it last month. Your council pushed it through." Mira stared at the statue, tears blurring her vision. "It's beautiful. It's you. The sculptor used you as the model. You breaking free, you choosing to fight, you refusing to be a victim. You've changed this realm, Mira. You've made it better." She turned to him, this vampire king who'd loved her across lifetimes, who'd never given up hope. "We changed it. Together." "Together," he agreed, pulling her close. They stood there in the memorial garden, surrounded by white roses and remembrance, and Mira felt the weight of 3 lifetimes settle into something like peace. She'd been Morel, murdered before her time. She'd been reborn twice more, dying before Nikolai could reach her. But now she was Mira, alive and strong and bonded to the man she loved, with centuries stretching before them. The curse, if it had ever been one, was broken. The searching was over. They'd found each other, and this time nothing would tear them apart. Years turned into decades. Mira grew into her role as queen, beloved by many in the vampire realm for her compassion and strength. The Human Advocacy Council flourished under her leadership, and trafficking incidents dropped to almost nothing. The realm transformed, becoming more accepting of humans, more willing to acknowledge them as equals rather than prey or property. Nikolai watched his wife work with pride and love that only grew stronger with time. She'd been magnificent as Morel, but Mira was something else entirely forged by 3 lifetimes of experience, strengthened by the bond, refusing to be diminished by the immortal world around her. On their 50th wedding anniversary, they stood once more in the garden where they'd been bonded, where they'd been married. The white roses were in full bloom, as they always were, and the twilight sky was clear. 50 years, Mira said wonderingly. "It feels like yesterday, and forever at the same time." "It's only the beginning," Nikolai said. "We have centuries more." "Good, I'm not nearly done with you yet." He laughed, the sound rich with joy. "What shall we do with all those centuries?" "Everything," Mira said simply. "We'll travel and work and rule and love. We'll have adventures. We'll make mistakes and fix them. We'll be together." "Together," Nikolai echoed. "Always." He kissed her beneath the roses and the stars, his queen and his bonded soul, the woman he'd searched 300 years to find. And Mira kissed him back, her king and her husband, the vampire who'd never stopped believing in love across lifetimes. They'd been torn apart by violence and death and cruel fate 3 times, but this time, this life, they'd won. They'd found each other, claimed each other, and built a future together that would last for centuries. The fairy tales got it wrong, Mira thought as Nikolai held her close. Happily ever after wasn't a destination. It was a choice, made every day, to love and be loved in return, and she would make that choice, lifetime after lifetime, for as long as she existed. Because some loves transcended death itself, some souls were meant to find each other, no matter how long it took, no matter what stood in their way. And some happy endings were worth waiting 300 years to finally claim. Around them, the white roses bloomed eternal, and the stars shone down on a vampire king and his human queen, finally, blessedly, together.